A new power was rising. Sauron had returned to Middle-earth, and the West could not hope to withstand him. The White Wizard Saruman had weighed the tides of fate and found that if he could not wrest the One Ring for himself, then it was better to bend his will to Sauron. In so doing, he hoped that, in time, he might sway or subdue the Dark Lord's dominion. Moreover, for all the evils wrought by Sauron, Saruman also favoured his love of knowledge, rule and order. Thus he resolved to gather strength under his banner and carve his own place in the War of the Ring. From the depths of Isengard, he summoned all that might serve his ends, forging alliances of old grievances and darker promises. The Dunlendings, long tormented by the Rohirrim, answered his call, driven by hatred passed down through the ages. In this latest video on the military societies of Middle-earth, we will cover the tale of those wild men of Dunland, sworn enemies of the Riders of Rohan and servants of the White Wizard. The Gwath'urim or Dunlendings were one of the oldest cultures of Middle-earth. They descended from members of the House of Haladin that had settled in the White Mountains in ancient times, becoming known as the Hillmen. Some of the Hillmen then emigrated north, inhabiting Eriador and becoming known as the Middlemen. During the Second Age, the Númenóreans returned to Middle-earth and began deforesting places such as Minhiraeth, causing the Middlemen to become hostile towards them. In an attempt to flee these conflicts, the people residing in Enethwaith took refuge in the eastern mountains that would become known as Dunland. The Dunlendings remained bitter enemies to the Dunedain. They avoided becoming absorbed into their kingdoms of Gondor and Arnor, maintaining their own culture and preserving their own tongue, known as Dunlendish. During the Watchful Peace, they began to settle the region of Calenathan, as over time, Gondor neglected to man garrisons there. Some Dunlendings began to mingle with the Gondorian garrison at Isengard, gradually seizing control of the fortress of Egranost and killing any of her guards that didn't merge with them. In TA 2510, Gondor granted Calenathan to the ancestors of the Rohirrim, known as the Eothiod, whom the Dunlendings considered usurpers to their land. During the reign of King Brago and Aldor, the Dunlendings were driven out by the Rohirrim beyond the Isen until the Enethwaith. During the reign of King Dior, the Dunlendings seized control of Isengard and began raiding shepherds in the northern Westfold. Dior led an expedition and defeated a host of Dunlendings before finding Isengard overrun. Dior sent word to Stewart Egelmoth, but no help came. Unable to breach the Great Tower, Dior had riders constantly patrol its area. Dior's son, Gram, inherited a time of war with the Dunlendings, which he passed on to his son, Helm Hammerhand. During his reign, a rich and powerful man named Freka claimed descendants from King Freowain, but rumour had it that he had much Dunlendish blood and was very dark-haired. In TA 2754, Freka asked Helm for his daughter's hand in marriage. The king refused and mocked Freka, which prompted a duel between the two, during which the noble was killed. Enraged, Helm declared Freka's family the enemies of the king, forcing Wulf to run away and join the Dunlendings. He was warmly received. There, for 4 years, he built up a Dunlendish army and formed an alliance with the Corsairs of Umbar. During the so-called Long Winter of 2758, Corsairs and Haredrim attacked Gondor, preventing it from coming to Rohan's aid, while Wulf and his allies attacked the Horse Lords. Unable to defend against the overwhelming numbers, Helm was defeated at the crossings of Isen. The majority of the Rohirrim fled to the fortress Suthburg, which would be known as Hornburg or Helm's Deep afterwards, while Edoras was defended by the king's son, Haleth. Wulf soon killed Haleth and took the capital, declaring himself the king. His armies besieged Suthburg, leading to a long and costly winter investment. It is said that Helm fought ferociously, leading countless sallies against the enemy, but hunger and dwindling numbers were too much, and sometime in early 2759 the king died, along with many of his people. The details are lost, but the siege was lifted either by the Rohirrim or because the Dunlendings got tired of maintaining it. Regardless, the long winter was finally over in March of 2759, and Helm's nephew, Freolaf Hildason, used the spring floods and led a contingent of Rohirrim down from Dunharrow, where a group of his people had survived, towards Edoras. Taking the Dunlendings entirely by surprise, they routed the defending force, killing Wulf and successfully reclaiming their capital. It is at this point a force of Gondorians joined with Freylaf's troops, and their combined might prevailed over the invaders, sending them back to the western wastes. The Dunlendings were less civilized than the men of Gondor or Rohan, less organized, and unable to raise a proper standing army. The only times they managed to raise large numbers of troops were during times of rare leadership, such as under Wulf and Saruman. During the first battle of the Forts of Isen, the Dunlendings fielded a force of light cavalry, while fierce companies of Dunlendish hillmen threw themselves upon Grimbold's shield walls. Yet they were unable to break them because they feared the Rohirrim, who were better skilled in warfare and better armed. The Dunlendings were without body armor and only had a few hauberks amongst them, gained by theft or in loot. The Rohirrim were armed by metalworkers of Gondor, while the Dunlendings had nothing of the sort, for Isengard only produced heavy and clumsy mail for orcs, to be used only by orcs. The best the Dunlendings could manage was to rally companies of infantry and enough cavalry to fill vanguards. They certainly were not professionally trained for warfare, but rather sent their greatest warriors to raid and exploit their enemies during times of war. Being wild and rugged people inhabiting hill country, the Dunlendings' primary weapon was most likely axes. Like all primitive peoples, they must also have used spears, bows, clubs, and perhaps their chieftains had looted swords. In terms of armor, they most likely wore leather with hide and fur cloaks and used wooden or bone shields. As Tolkien certainly based the Rohirrim on the Anglo-Saxons of 5th to 6th century Britain, it seems fitting that their Dunlending enemies were at least partially inspired by Celtic peoples of that same era. This is further supported by their cousins inhabiting Bree, Archet and Coombe, which have Celtic names, and the Store Hobbits, who resided with the Dunlendings in Dunland, which have Celtic elements in their names. Curumo was a Maiar of Auli, and was one of the 5 guardians sent to protect the elves from Melkor. After the fall of Morgoth, Curumo was ordered by Auli to return to Middle-earth and counter the threat of Sauron. He was appointed the first and chief Istar of 5 emissaries, but quickly became jealous of his colleague Oloril, who did not wish to travel to Middle-earth. He came back to Middle-earth around TA 1000, and became known in the Sindarin language as Curanir, or in the Westron language as Saruman. His Fana took on the form of an old man, and went to work travelling east. During this time, he begrudged Oloril, known as Gandalf, who obtained Narria's ring. In TA 2463, Saruman became the leader of the White Council, despite Galadriel preferring Gandalf to be its leader. At that time, Saruman could sense the resurgence of Sauron in Dol Guldur, and his desire to take back the One Ring. Saruman went to work, spending years in Minas Tirith's archives learning all he could about his enemy. He soon surmised that a Palantir was left at Orthanc. Thus he ventured to Rohan. After defeating the Dunlendings, Freylaf was made king of Rohan, and at his inauguration, the wizard Saruman appeared, offering friendship and support. Saruman offered to take up residence in Isengard to help defend the west. Freylaf starved the Dunlendings out of Isengard by TA 2759 and recommended to Stuart Berrin that Saruman should take up residence in Isengard. It was then that Saruman began behaving as a lord of men. In TA 2759, he became lieutenant of the steward and warden of Orthanc. There he kept the Palantir a secret from his colleagues. In TA 2851, during a White Council, Gandalf revealed that he had discovered the necromancer in Dol Guldur was not a ringwraith but Sauron himself, and he urged the council to act. Saruman had already begun to lust for power and counselled to forestall such an action, stating it was his belief the One Ring was lost forever in the Beluga. In truth, Saruman was biding his time so he could hunt down the One Ring for himself. In TA 2941, during a White Council, Gandalf again urged the council to attack Sauron at Dol Guldur. This time Saruman consented, fearing Sauron would find the One Ring if left unmolested. In TA 2953, during the last White Council, Saruman proclaimed he knew as a matter of fact that the One Ring was lost forever to the Beluga to quell his colleagues' concern. Yet this was not the case. Thereafter he withdrew to Isengard, fortifying it and making no more consorts with the members of the White Council. Later, in TA 3018, Saruman captured Gandalf and finally disclosed his true plan. A new power is rising. Against it, the old allies and policies will not avail us at all. There is no hope left in the elves or dying Numenor. This, then, is one choice before you, before us. We may join with that power. As the power grows, its proved friends will also grow, and the wise, such as you and I, may with patience come at last to direct its courses, to control it. At this time, Saruman's use of the Palantir led to his corruption by Sauron. He began to make trouble for the Rohirrim, and openly declared himself to be the Lord of Isengard. Sauron, fully ensconced in his fortress at Barad-dûr, was breeding massive armies of orcs, and drawn to him were his most powerful servants, the 9 Ringwraiths. The preparations for the coming war were nearing completion. Saruman had finally forged an army in order to set himself up as an equal to Sauron. In doing so, he had torn down the trees within Isengard and the surrounding area in order to fuel his forges of industry. He ordered Orcish and Dunlending raids upon the ailing kingdom of Rohan, whose king he had begun to corrupt and sway towards inaction and frailty. Saruman raised one of the most formidable armies of the Third Age. By TA 3019, Saruman's army was around 10,000 strong, consisting of orcs, Dunlendings, warg riders, large wolves, Crebain, orc men and goblin men with a core of Uruk-hai. Saruman signified his forces using a white hand emblem and the elf rune for S, typically upon the shields, helms and faces of Uruk-hai. Saruman also created tall black pillars with great stones, carved to be white hands. While Saruman certainly ruled by fear, like Morgoth and Sauron, he also notably earned the respect of his forces, and the White Hand instilled a sense of loyalty, discipline, and esprit de corps. Saruman was much akin to Sauron, both having been Mayor of Auli. Saruman means man of skill, a fitting title, for the wizard was deeply knowledgeable of ancient lore, the deep arts, ringcraft, and fields of STEM. In this he emulated and in some ways surpassed Sauron. With this, Saruman established a professional army, an intelligence and communications network, and an industrialized war economy. Saruman began to draw orcs of the Misty Mountains into his service as early as TA 2990. They acted as the bulk of his manpower, running his machinery, and tasked with assailing Rohan. Saruman also gathered wolves and their more feared cousins, wargs, which the orcs rode into battle. Utilizing his deep arts, Saruman's voice was able to persuade, convince, sway hearts, plant fear, and spread lies. Saruman's voice was so effective that he convinced the Witch King that he knew nothing of the One Ring. Through this, Saruman recruited Dunlendings, promising to reclaim their lost land from the Rohirrim. Thus, the Dunlendings were incorporated into his army's vanguard and his network of spies. Saruman had his spies gather intelligence in the Shire, Bree, and watch the movement of his rival Gandalf. One of Saruman's most famous spies was the Squint-Eyed Southerner, an orc man from Dunland, who also helped him purchase pipeweed from the Shire. Dunlendings were also employed as ruffians during the scouring of the Shire. The most famous mannish servant of Saruman was of course Grima Wormtongue. Grima acted as a spy and agent, planted as chief counselor to King Theoden, and used to weaken the Rohirrim monarch through words and poison. Saruman used his deep craft to deceive Grima, promising him Éowyn in exchange for his service. Saruman also controlled Crebain, employing them as spies to watch the movements of his enemies. For communications, Saruman utilized a Palantiri, though this ultimately proved his downfall. Saruman had extensive knowledge of biology and would breed some of the most powerful warriors of Middle-earth. The culmination of his experiments on the orcs was the fighting Uruk-hai, a breed of half-orc, half-humans who were many times stronger than their orcish brethren. Yet the true core of their strength lay in the fact that, unlike the orcs, they were totally unaffected by sunlight. Saruman managed to compel Uruk-hai into his service by rewarding them with man-flesh. The Uruk-hai were more resilient to sunlight, faster, smarter, stronger, and larger than standard orcs, but shorter than men. Saruman also bred orc men and goblin men, who notably fought at the Battle of Hornburg and the Scouring of the Shire. These, however, were of different species to the Uruk-hai. To challenge or emulate Sauron, Saruman also forged his own Ring of Power. This ring may have increased Saruman's power of dominance, helping compel those into his service. It's possible the ring helped Saruman infuse greater speed and motivation into his orcs and Uruk-hai, as Aragorn noted while tracking Merry and Pippin. Saruman also had the ability to appear out of nowhere and sneak up on his enemies, traits not too dissimilar from the One Ring. Saruman also used his knowledge of machinery to forge specialized weapons for Uruk-hai, such as iron helms, shields and armor, broad-bladed swords, unlike traditional orc scimitars, and great bows made of yew wood, fit for men. It is also notable that Saruman did not arm the Dunlendings as he did with Uruk-hai, perhaps seeking to easily be rid of them after his conquests were completed. Saruman was able to forge such weapons by developing underground pits, iron wheel machinery, and large furnaces under Isengard. Orcs in his service cut down the local trees to feed his furnaces. Described by Tolkien scholars as an industrial hell, Saruman's Isengard seemed to emulate Morgoth's Angband and Sauron's Barad-dûr. It was here Saruman used his knowledge of chemistry to innovate the Fire of Orthanc, an explosive substance reminiscent of gunpowder. Saruman truly industrialized his territory into arguably a full war economy. Saruman had one of the most diverse and professional militaries of the Third Age, second only to Sauron's. Orcs and Dunlendings were used as light infantry, archers and vanguards. For cavalry he had wolf riders, warg riders and mounted Dunlendings. For heavy units he had orc men, goblin men and Uruk-hai. Uruk-hai, being stronger and smarter than their orcish cousins, were able to better follow and give orders, making them ideal commanding officers. For reconnaissance, Saruman utilized Crebain and his wolves. For intelligence gathering, he had a network run by Dunlendings and half-men, and for communications he used the Palantiri. Similar to Morgoth and Sauron, Saruman industrialized his territory to forge weapons, armor, and war engines for his army. Perhaps unique only to Saruman was the creation and use of the Fire of Orthanc, which was so powerful it breached the walls of Hornburg. Similar to those of Morgoth and Sauron, Saruman's army had hierarchical ranks. There were orcs and Uruk-hai commanding troops and companies, such as captains Ugluk and Mauhur, who led those like Snagga the Scout and Lugdush. Saruman also coordinated his efforts with the orcs of Mordor and Moria. Ugluk had to work with Grishnak, who both competed to bring the captured halflings to Isengard or Barad-dûr. Saruman's dominance was strong enough to keep his Isengard forces loyal as they defeated the Moria and Mordor orcs during a small conflict, and Ugluk was able to impose his will, forcing Grishnak's company to withdraw. Saruman and the Dunlendings unleashed their war against the Rohirrim at Helm's Deep. Yet just as the Uruk-hai were breaking the gate of the keep at Hornburg, suddenly the horn of Helm Hammerhand blew, as Theoden, leading his riders alongside Aragorn and Legolas, burst forth and pushed the Uruk-hai back along the causeway. Gimli, Eomer and Gamling led their force out of the glittering caves, driving the Uruk-hai before them until they had retreated beyond the deeping wall. It is at this point that Gandalf appeared upon Shadowfax with the rising sun behind him. He had brought with him Erkenbrand and a force of 1,000 riders, battle-hardened survivors of the conflicts on the River Isen, led by their valiant captains Grimbold and Elfhelm. Likewise, an entirely newly arrived forest of strange trees blocked off the final avenue of escape. Following Gandalf's lead, the Eorlingis charged into the rear of the Uruk-hai, while Theoden and Eomer's forces supported the attack, crashing against the besiegers with all of the strength their exhausted soldiers could muster. The Sons of Yol would prove their valor once more, attacking the entrapped fighting Uruk-hai with a ferocity inspired by the men lost at the fords of Isen and in the previous raids on their country. The Uruks soon lost cohesion and broke ranks, ensuring their slaughter, with the survivors fleeing into the newly emerged forest to their detriment. Saruman's foray into the War of the Ring was nipped in the bud with a defeat at Hornburg, but his real defeat came closer to home. With Isengard having been emptied due to the assault on the Hornburg, their defences were no match for the might of the Ents, accompanied by a sizable contingent of Huorns. Treebeard and company tore down the walls of Isengard and created a dam over the Wizard's Vale, destroying the pits, mines and weapons of war which Saruman had accumulated, effectively cleansing the taint of darkness from the valley. Exploiting old grudges, Saruman turned a people already bitter over historical land disputes into pawns in his greater scheme. With promises of revenge and power, the Dunlendings blindly trusted Saruman, who led them to a devastating loss at the Battle of Helm's Deep. The Dunlendings, though fierce in their fight, were left as victims of Saruman's ambitions, a tragic reminder of how the weak are often exploited in the games of the powerful. As for Saruman, despite his army's strength, discipline, and industrialized innovations, he relied too heavily on brute force over strategic wisdom. Saruman left his stronghold vulnerable, and both he and the Dunlendings paid the price for their ambition and betrayal. More videos on Middle-earth are on the way, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we will catch you on the next one.